EB1A, or becoming an alien of extraordinary ability, is the fastest way to a green card for people from India or China. This is the path that I took. Hi friends, my name is Saloni Kapoor, and today we are going to be talking about the visas available to do your residency on, which one you should choose, and regardless of which one you have chosen, how to get to a green card in the shortest amount of time. Let's get started. So, the first visa that you will usually encounter is the B1 B2, which is your regular tourism visa, and you do your rotations on this visa. If you're coming to US to take some tests, then you will also most likely be coming on the B1 B2 to do that. But for residency or for a research job, you usually have to get a H1B or a J1. So let's talk about the H1 first. So H1 is the harder visa to get because it is costly to your employer. If you do it for a research job, then it has to be a paid position because the law requires that anyone on an H1 be paid. It is a dual intent visa, which means that you can have an immigration intent even though you are currently a non-immigrant. If you are using the H1B for residency, then you will need step 3. And during residency, you will be allowed to do moonlighting. There is a limit on H1, which is 6 years, after which you can extend it by applying for immigration. And we will talk later about how the immigration application is done. The second and more common visa is J1. Now, J1 can be used to do research or you can use it to do residency. When you do it for research, you can do an unpaid position. And from J1 research, you can go to H1. But if you use it for residency, you will not be able to go to H1 directly without doing a waiver. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Most programs will sponsor a J1 as a default because it is sponsored by ECFMG and the program doesn't have that much administrative burden. It is a strictly non-immigrant intent visa, and to convert it to an immigrant intent visa, you have to either follow the 2-year home country requirement, which means you have to go to your home country for 2 years, or what most people do is a waiver. There are multiple ways to do a waiver, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. The couple of other things to know about J1 is that you are not allowed to moonlight, so you get paid a little bit less if your program is into moonlighting. Don't worry too much about this. This is not a significant source of income. And it has a 7-year duration limit. Briefly, I want to talk about the O1 visa, which is colloquially called the Genius visa. This has exactly the same requirements as a EB1, which is a pathway to green card. And we will talk about that later. If you have already qualified for O1 visa, then you are automatically qualified for EB1, which means that you will be on the pathway to green card really quickly. Let's talk about the J1 waiver now. A waiver is done in lieu of the 2-year home country requirement. Most people choose to not go back to their home country for 2 years because it's just too disruptive to your life and your career. What most people will elect to do instead is the Conrad 30 program. This is working in underserved area for 3 years. You don't have to be worried about working in an underserved area because these underserved areas are actually decent quality of life cities. They're not underserved like in India where you have to go to a village. These are still real cities that you will be living in. There are also an alternative pathway called Interested Government Agency pathway where institutions like the VA hospital will sponsor a spot for the waiver. Lastly, some people will do a persecution waiver, which says that if you can prove that when you go back to your home country, you will be persecuted by the government, then you are free to not do the waiver. There is also something known as hardship waiver, where if you can prove that by going home for 2 years, a US citizen will face extreme hardship, like if you have a child or something, then you are allowed to waive off that 2-year home country requirement. This is very hard to meet and typically not pursued, but I wanted to put it out there for completion. We have talked about the types of visas. Let's talk about how to get from a visa to a green card. So, there are many pathways to a green card. There's family-based, there's employment-based, there's investment-based. I'm only going to talk about the employment-based pathways because that's what most physicians will undertake. There are two categories of employment-based green cards. There is EB1 and EB2. EB1 is first preference. So these are the most skilled individuals and they get priority. They must satisfy 3 out of 10 criteria, and we will talk about what those 10 criteria are in just a second. This is actually the only reasonable way to get a green card for India and China because EB2 is processing delay of 20 years. If you don't want to wait 20 years to get your green card. Here's the fun part. Even if you are from India and China, you should still file the EB2 first because you can port your priority date from your EB2 approval to EB1. Here's how it works. The EB2 has a lower bar. So as soon as you're ready, you can file EB2 and get it approved. And you have now that date which will be your priority date. Now, maybe say 2 or 3 years down the line, you have built up enough credentials that you are eligible for EB1. Then you apply for EB1, there is a 2-year delay even for EB1. So if you use your priority date from 2 or 3 years ago, then your priority date becomes current. This is something I wish I had done earlier. So this is my advice to you. Get your EB2 done as soon as possible, regardless of which country you're from. Which brings me to EB2. So there are 2 ways to file for EB2. One is called PERM, the other one is called National Interest Waiver. PERM is usually filed by your employer and they usually do it when you're approaching the end of that 6-year mark for your H1B. The employer's lawyer doesn't work for you. They are working for the employer. So they don't have any incentive to get you a green card sooner. So the National Interest Waiver is what you can do instead. It is a self-petition, which means you can hire a personal immigration lawyer to file this on your behalf. And it is expensive to do that, but it is totally worth it. The bar for EB2, like I said, is lower. So you have to have an advanced degree, which everyone will have when they're doing a residency. And you have to have some amount of publications and citations. A lawyer will help you guide to tell you when you're ready to file EB2 and what you need to do to get there. This is actually current for every other country except India and China. So if you get your EB2 approved and you're not from India or China, you will get a green card immediately. So what is the criteria for EB1? Let's talk about that. EB1 is called Alien of Extraordinary Ability, which is a very funny name. But there are 2 ways to achieve that. You can either have a one-time major internationally recognized award. The example given for this is usually the Nobel Prize. Now, if you can win the Nobel Prize, that's great, good for you. For most people, that's not an option. So, we will satisfy 3 out of these 10 requirements. Now, you can read these 10 requirements. They are on the USCIS website. I'll link it below in the description. But what most people as physicians will end up using are the ones that I have put in bold. So, you've been asked to judge the work of others. This you satisfy by doing reviews. You review articles for journals for them to be published in the journal. Usually, you're recommended to do at least 10 of these reviews to qualify for this criteria. Then next criteria is contributions of major significance. Here the important word is major significance. There are two ways to establish major significance. One is your citations. So you have published a paper and there are citations of your publication which are important both in quantitative sense, so number of publication, but also in a qualitative sense. So you have to show that okay, this person in say Europe has cited my work and advanced literature in a way that is meaningful. So my work has contributed to the advancement of the field. And the other way is to get letters of recommendations. Now letters are also tricky because you have to get two kinds of letters. One is from people who know you and have worked with you, but you also need letters from independent people. Independent people are people who are not from the institutions that you have worked at. So they can't be from your med school, they can't be from where you're doing your residency, and you cannot have directly worked with them on a research project. So they can't be co-authors on any of your papers. It's kind of tricky to find these people. And these people also have to be like big names in the field that you're claiming as your field of major contribution. So usually you will go through your mentors and say, hey, can you reach out to this person on my behalf and have them give me a letter of recommendation. Somewhat correlated and almost always used by physicians in their EB1 application is authorship of scholarly articles as a criteria. One thing I would recommend is setting up a Google Scholar profile so that you can track how many papers you've published and what their citation count is. This criteria also relies on publishing in high impact factor journals. So you can find the impact factor of a journal by Googling it, and lawyers have access to databases that say, okay, this paper is within top 10% of this clinical niche, and they will use that data to support meeting this criteria for your EB1 application. Lastly, I have also seen people using criteria 8, which is leading or critical role in a distinguished organization. Sometimes people satisfy it by leading a big administrative role in the hospital that they're working at, usually when they have already been an attending for many years. Sometimes you can also satisfy this role by participating in national level organizations for your subspecialty and having an important role in a major committee over there. Now I want to put it all together and see what the pathway will look like. So you'll first come to US to do your rotations on a B1, B2 visa. Now you will either do a research job or do a residency. Now you can do it on either a J1 or an H1. Let's talk about J1 first because it is a slightly longer pathway. You first have to go through the waiver to be able to get on the immigration pathway to a green card. The waiver you can complete by either doing the 2-year home country requirement, which most people don't do, or the 3-year underserved area requirement. This is what most people will end up doing. When you start your waiver, you automatically go on an H1. And as soon as your waiver requirement is met, you can start the pathway to green card. For most people, applying for EB2 is actually the direct pathway to green card. Now, you will usually do this through the national interest waiver. But for people who are Indian and Chinese, you will first apply for a EB2 and then use that priority date and apply for EB1 a few years down the line when you meet 3 out of those 10 criteria we discussed. And now because you have your priority date from EB2, you will jump to front of the line and get your green card. That's all I got for you today. Let me know what questions you have in the comments below and let me know what you want me to discuss next. Thank you for watching.